The moment Officer Kyle Preston drew his weapon and said hands down, the entire park had already accepted one version of the story. And only one woman knew the truth was something else entirely. Olivia Reed sat on the weathered bench with her 9-month-old son Marcus, watching him grip a teething ring with the fierce concentration only babies possess. The afternoon sun filtered through maple leaves, casting dancing shadows across her medical journal. She'd stolen this hour between her pediatric rounds at Children's Hospital and her evening shift at the community clinic. Just her, Marcus, and the kind of quiet that felt like luxury. The park smelled like cut grass and someone's forgotten coffee from Dunkin'. A jogger passed wearing worn Nike sneakers, earbuds trailing tinny music that sounded like Drake. 2 teenagers shared a bag of hot Cheetos near the fountain, their conversation punctuated by the kind of laughter that carries. Normal. Safe. The kind of ordinary Tuesday that made her grateful for small things. Marcus's babbled attempts at mama, the way his tiny fingers explored everything with scientific curiosity, the fact that she'd managed to keep both her jobs and still find time for moments like this. She didn't notice the patrol car until it stopped with a deliberate slowness that made the teenagers look up from their phones. Officer Preston stepped out first, adjusting his utility belt with practiced precision. His partner, Officer Davis, followed, younger, nervous energy radiating from his movements. Preston's eyes swept the playground with the kind of efficiency that came from years of patrol work. But when they settled on Olivia, something shifted. A flicker of recognition that made her stomach tighten like she'd swallowed ice water. She knew that look. She'd seen it in courtrooms, in interrogation rooms, in the faces of men who believed their version of justice was the only one that mattered. 3 years ago, she'd testified against Preston's former partner in a corruption case that made the front page of the Chicago Tribune. Detective Mike Chen had been taking bribes from drug dealers, skimming evidence, and falsifying reports for nearly 2 years. Olivia's federal investigation, meticulous, airtight, devastating, had put him behind bars for 15 years. Preston had been in the courtroom that day, jaw clenched, watching his friend's career crumble while reporters scribbled notes, and Chen's wife sobbed in the gallery. "Afternoon, ma'am." Preston approached with the kind of casual authority that wasn't casual at all. His voice carried the flat professionalism of someone who'd had this conversation 1,000 times before. "Mind if we ask you a few questions?" Olivia's training kicked in. Stay calm, stay polite, protect Marcus. Never give them a reason to escalate. Never show fear, even when your heart is hammering against your ribs like a trapped bird. "Of course, officer. Is there a problem?" "We've had reports of suspicious activity in the area." Davis circled to her left, cutting off her natural exit route toward the parking lot. His hand rested on his radio, fingers drumming an anxious rhythm. Someone matching your description was seen acting erratically. The lie hung in the air like humidity before a storm. Olivia knew no such reports existed. She also knew that arguing would only escalate things, and escalation with a baby in her arms was a luxury she couldn't afford. Around them, the park's afternoon rhythm continued. A mother pushed her toddler on a swing, cooing encouragement. An elderly man fed pigeons from a paper bag. A group of teenagers played pickup basketball, their trash talk and laughter creating a soundtrack of normalcy that felt suddenly fragile. "I'm just feeding my son," she said quietly, gesturing to the bottle in Marcus's hands. He was working on it with determined focus, tiny bubbles forming around the nipple. "Mind if we take a look in your bag?" Preston's question wasn't really a question. His tone carried the weight of authority, the assumption of compliance that came with the badge. It wasn't the first time someone had demanded to search her belongings. Being a black woman in America meant learning to navigate these moments. The random TSA searches, the department store security guards who followed her through aisles, the assumptions that shadowed her despite her credentials, her education, her spotless record. Around them, people were starting to notice. A jogger in Lululemon leggings slowed to a walk, pulling out her earbuds. The teenagers looked up from their game, sensing drama, like sharks sensing blood. Someone's child stopped swinging, intuiting the adult tension that had shifted the park's energy. Olivia opened her purse with deliberate calm. Diapers, formula, her hospital ID badge dangling from a retractable cord, a prescription pad, her wallet with photos of Marcus at various stages of chubby-cheeked perfection. Normal mom things. The kind of contents that should have ended this interaction before it began. But Preston was already reaching for her diaper bag, the larger one with cartoon elephants that she'd gotten at her baby shower. His movements were brisk, invasive, the kind of search that assumed guilt and looked for evidence to confirm it. "Sir, that's not necessary," she began. "I'll decide what's necessary." His voice carried now, loud enough for the growing audience to hear, loud enough to establish dominance, to make it clear who held the power in this exchange. "You seem nervous." "Why are you nervous?" "Because you have a gun and I have a baby," she thought. "Because this is exactly how things go wrong, how routine interactions become tragedies, how mothers become hashtags, how babies lose their parents to misunderstandings that aren't really misunderstandings at all. Because Marcus is looking at me with those wide brown eyes, and I need him to see that mommy isn't scared, even when she is." "I'm not nervous," she said, keeping her voice level. "I'm confused about why you're searching my things when I haven't done anything wrong." Preston's hand froze on the diaper bag zipper. Through the gathering crowd, a figure in a gray hoodie moved closer. Too close, too casual, threading between observers with the kind of purposeful aimlessness that set off every alarm bell in Olivia's trained mind. She'd spent enough years in federal law enforcement to recognize surveillance, setup, the deliberate choreography of people who thought they were smarter than they were. The man in the hoodie was maybe 30, average height, forgettable face, partially obscured by sunglasses and a baseball cap. But his movements weren't forgettable. They were practiced, professional. The way he approached her diaper bag, the casual bump against the stroller, the sleight of hand that would have been invisible to most observers, it all screamed setup. Olivia's peripheral vision caught the movement. Something small and white changing hands, disappearing into the diaper bag's side pocket with the kind of precision that spoke of rehearsal. By the time she processed what was happening, the baggie was already nestled between Marcus's formula cans, planted with the casual efficiency of someone who'd done this before. "Well, well." Preston's voice dripped satisfaction as his fingers closed around the evidence. "What do we have here?" The park held its breath. The basketball game stopped mid-dribble. The woman on the swing caught her toddler and pulled him close. Phones came out like flowers blooming after rain. iPhones and Androids, tablets and cameras, all angled toward the drama unfolding on the weathered park bench. Someone whispered "world star" under their breath. Someone else muttered "typical." The commentary began before the facts were even clear, because that's how these things worked now. Narrative first, truth later, if at all. Olivia stared at the baggie. White powder in a corner of her son's diaper bag, nestled between organic formula and teething biscuits, and felt the world tilt off its axis. 3 years of medical school at Northwestern, 2 years in the FBI, 5 years building her pediatric practice, and now this. Someone had just planted drugs on her in front of 50 witnesses, and the phones were already rolling, already writing the story that would follow her forever. "That's not mine." The words felt hollow, even as she said them. Worn smooth by repetition in 1,000 interrogation rooms, courtrooms, traffic stops. How many times had she heard that exact phrase? How many times had she watched suspects claim innocence with the same desperate certainty she felt now? They never are. Preston's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Ma'am, I need you to step away from the child." The world narrowed to that single sentence. Step away from the child. The words every mother fears. The threat that cuts deeper than any personal accusation. Marcus wasn't just her son. He was her heart walking around outside her body. Her reason for everything. The tiny person who'd made her understand what unconditional love actually meant. No. The word came out harder than she intended, carrying years of suppressed anger, professional frustration, and maternal instinct. "That's my son. Step away from the child. Now." Preston's hand moved toward his weapon, a gesture designed to intimidate, to establish absolute authority in a situation that was spiraling beyond his control. Marcus started crying, not the hungry cry or the tired cry that she'd learned to interpret, but the scared cry that broke her heart, the high-pitched wail of a baby who sensed his mother's distress and reflected it back in the only way he knew how. The crowd pressed closer, drawn by spectacle and smartphones, by the irresistible human impulse to witness disaster. The live streams were already starting. Facebook Live, Instagram stories, TikTok videos, with captions like, Baby mama got caught, and typical welfare queen, and worse things she didn't want to read. The comments rolled by like toxic rain. Another one bites the dust. Where's the baby daddy? Tax dollars at work. She looks guilty AF. Hood rat's gonna hood rat. But she also saw something else in the digital chaos. A teenage delivery driver with his phone angled perfectly, catching not just the confrontation, but the moments leading up to it. His face was tight with concentration, thumbs moving fast across his screen, rewinding and replaying, capturing angles that told a different story than the one Preston was selling. Jeremy Chen, no relation to the dirty cop, just bad luck with surnames, was 17, worked for DoorDash after school to help his mom pay rent, and had a natural eye for detail that came from growing up with a camera phone generation. He'd been delivering bubble tea to the teenagers when the whole thing started, and something about the setup had felt wrong from the beginning. Officers. Olivia's voice carried the kind of calm that comes from years of delivering bad news to parents, from explaining terminal diagnoses and treatment failures, and all the ways the human body could betray hope. I'm Dr. Olivia Reed. I'm a pediatrician at Children's Hospital, and I'm also a former FBI agent. That baggie was planted by someone in a gray hoodie who approached my bag approximately 30 seconds ago. The young man with the delivery uniform has video evidence of the entire interaction. The words fell into the crowd like stones into still water, creating ripples of confusion and disbelief. A pediatrician? FBI? The narrative was shifting, and phone cameras swiveled to catch the changing story. Preston's hand moved closer to his weapon. I said, "Step away. I have badge number 47921. She kept talking, loud enough for the phones to catch it, clear enough for the audio to be usable in court if it came to that. I worked federal cases for the Bureau from 2019 to 2021, specializing in public corruption and civil rights violations. I can provide credentials, references, and documentation. But right now, someone is trying to frame me, and I need you to secure that evidence properly and question the man in the gray hoodie who's currently walking toward the parking lot." The crowd swiveled like a flock of birds changing direction. Gray hoodie was indeed walking away, hands in pockets, trying to look casual and failing spectacularly. His pace was just a little too fast, his posture just a little too tense, his route just a little too direct toward the parking lot exit. Davis keyed his radio, finally stepping up to do the job he'd sworn to do. "We need backup at Riverside Park. Possible evidence tampering in progress. Suspect in gray hoodie heading toward parking lot." But Preston wasn't backing down. Too much invested, too much at stake, too many years of resentment crystallizing into this moment. "I don't care if you're the Pope. Nobody plants drugs on themselves. Nobody carries around FBI credentials to a drug deal. Check the timestamp on the video," Jeremy called out, still recording, his teenage voice cracking with adrenaline and outrage. "I got everything. The plant, the whole setup, the way that dude coordinated with—" He stopped himself, sensing he was about to say something that might matter in court. That's when the real shock came. A familiar voice cut through the crowd noise like a knife through silk. Agent Sarah Martinez, her former partner, speaking into her own phone with the crisp authority that came from 15 years in federal law enforcement. "This is Agent Martinez, FBI Chicago Field Office. I'm at Riverside Park, where my former colleague Dr. Olivia Reed is being set up by what appears to be a coordinated effort involving Officer Preston and persons unknown. I have audio evidence of Preston discussing how to bury the Reed investigation and make the problem go away." The park went silent, except for Marcus's crying and the distant sound of sirens approaching. Sarah stepped forward, badge visible, her presence changing the entire dynamic of the confrontation. She was older than Olivia, grayer, with the kind of weathered competence that came from decades of dealing with corrupt cops and dirty politicians. 3 hours ago, Sarah continued, her voice carrying to every phone in the crowd, Officer Preston was recorded discussing this exact scenario with persons connected to the Riverside Development Project, the one Dr. Reed helped expose last month when she testified about contractor bribes and bid rigging. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. The Riverside Development Project, a $50 million plan to build luxury condos where low-income housing currently stood, had been riddled with corruption from the beginning. Olivia's testimony had exposed a network of bribes, kickbacks, and political favors that reached from City Hall to the police department to the construction unions. City Councilman Robert Walsh, the project's biggest supporter, had been pushing family safety initiatives that targeted single mothers for increased surveillance and intervention. His rhetoric about dangerous families and welfare abuse had played well with certain voters, but the real goal was clear: displace the residents who stood in the way of gentrification, silence the voices that questioned the project's legitimacy. The crowd's energy shifted like a tide turning. Phones that had been recording Olivia's humiliation swiveled toward Preston, toward Sarah, toward the gray hoodie being tackled in the parking lot by backup officers who'd arrived with sirens blaring and lights flashing. Someone shouted, "Set up!" Someone else started clapping. The narrative was rewriting itself in real time, hashtags already forming. $, Olivia Reed, $, planted evidence, $, corrupt cops, $, justice for mothers. But Olivia wasn't interested in vindication or viral fame. She was interested in truth, in consequences, in making sure that Marcus grew up in a world that was just a little bit better than the one she'd inherited. "Officer Preston," she said quietly, her voice cutting through the chaos with the kind of calm that commands attention. "I know you blame me for what happened to Detective Chen. I understand that you see me as the person who destroyed your partner's career, who brought federal scrutiny to your department, who made your job harder and your reputation worse." Preston's face went through several colors: red with anger, pale with recognition, flushed again with the dawning realization that this moment was being broadcast live to thousands of viewers across multiple platforms. "But planting evidence on a mother in front of her child," Olivia continued, adjusting Marcus on her hip, his crying finally settling into hiccups as he sensed the shift in her energy. "That's not justice. That's not even revenge. That's just cruelty. You destroyed a good man's career," Preston said, but the fire had gone out of his voice. The fight was draining out of him as the reality of his situation became clear, caught on camera, witnessed by dozens, his conspiracy unraveling in real time. "A good man doesn't take money from drug dealers," Olivia replied, her voice gentle but implacable. "A good man doesn't falsify evidence or intimidate witnesses or plant drugs on mothers in public parks. A good man protects children instead of traumatizing them." The live streams were exploding. Comments flew by faster than anyone could read them, a digital river of outrage, support, analysis, and hot takes. But mixed in with the usual internet chaos, something else was happening. People were sharing their own stories: other mothers who'd been harassed, other professionals who'd been profiled, other families who'd been torn apart by the assumption of guilt, by systems designed to criminalize poverty and punish vulnerability. Me Too. Black Lives Matter. Mothers under attack stories, pouring out like water through a broken dam. They searched my car 3 times in 1 week. Child services came because my neighbor said I looked suspicious. I'm a nurse, and they still treated me like a drug dealer. My son was 7 when they handcuffed him. Davis stepped back, unhooking his cuffs from Preston's belt with movements that suggested he'd finally remembered his oath to protect and serve. "Kyle, it's over. Stand down." But it wasn't over. Not really. It was just beginning. The investigation that followed made national news for weeks. CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, all covering different angles of the same story. The Riverside development scandal expanded into a wider probe of police corruption, political payoffs, and the systematic targeting of low-income communities. Federal investigators descended on Chicago like locusts, turning over stones that had been comfortable in the dark for years. Preston was arrested within hours, charged with evidence planting, conspiracy, and civil rights violations. The gray hoodie turned out to be Marcus Williams, a private investigator hired by Councilman Walsh to create incidents that would support his family safety initiatives. Williams flipped immediately, providing recordings, emails, and financial records that implicated half the city council. Walsh himself resigned in disgrace, his political career ending not with a bang, but with a whimper. A press conference where he blamed everyone but himself, claimed he was the victim of a witch hunt, and promised to fight the charges that were already being prepared by 3 different prosecutors. The media coverage was relentless and predictably divided. Cable news found its narrative and stuck to it. Heroic mother versus corrupt system, David versus Goliath, the power of social media to expose injustice in real time. But the coverage also revealed the fault lines that ran through American society like cracks in a foundation. Half the country called Olivia a hero, a brave mother who'd stood up to corruption and won. The other half found reasons to tear her down. She was too articulate to be a real victim, too composed to be genuinely afraid, too professional to understand real struggle. Twitter became a battleground. She's not even that poor if she has a medical degree. Privilege doesn't protect you from racism. This is what happens when you stand up to the system. She's being used by liberals to push an agenda. Look at her credentials and tell me she deserved this. Every black mother deserves better. The think pieces wrote themselves. Op-eds about racial profiling, the militarization of police, the intersection of motherhood and citizenship, the way social media could both expose and distort truth. Academic conferences were planned. Documentary filmmakers started making calls. Olivia stopped reading the comments after the first week. She'd learned long ago that you couldn't control how people interpreted your story, only how accurately you told it. The internet's opinion of her courage, her victimhood, her authenticity, none of that mattered as much as the fact that Marcus was safe, that justice was being served, that other mothers might face fewer assumptions and accusations because of what had happened in Riverside Park. But she didn't stop working. She kept seeing patients at Children's Hospital, kept delivering babies at the community clinic, kept showing up to medical conferences and FBI alumni events, and the kind of professional obligations that had always defined her life. She testified before Congress about police accountability, spoke at law schools about civil rights, and gave interviews to journalists who wanted to understand how corruption worked at the street level. And she kept coming to the park. Every Tuesday afternoon, when her schedule allowed, she'd bring Marcus to the same bench, under the same maple trees, because the alternative, hiding, cowering, letting them win, wasn't really living. It was just existing in the shadow of other people's hatred. The first few times back were hard. People stared, some took pictures, a few approached with sympathy, others with suspicion. But gradually, the park returned to its normal rhythm. Kids played on swings, teenagers shared snacks. Joggers ran circuits around the pond. Life resumed its ordinary magic. 6 months later, the park installed new security cameras and better lighting. A small plaque near the playground read, "In appreciation of community members who speak truth and protect children." It didn't mention her name, but Marcus patted it every time they walked by, his toddler hands leaving tiny fingerprints on the bronze surface. Jeremy Chen used his viral video to launch a documentary about racial profiling and police accountability. Setup won 3 awards at film festivals and got him into USC Film School with a full scholarship. He stayed in touch with Olivia, sending updates about his classes and career plans, occasionally asking her to speak to his documentary subjects about the importance of evidence and testimony. Agent Martinez was promoted to head the FBI's Civil Rights Division, where she launched new protocols for investigating police corruption and protecting whistleblowers. She sent Olivia updates on cases that grew out of the Riverside investigation. Dozens of arrests, millions in restitution, policy changes that might prevent other mothers from facing planted evidence and false accusations. Preston got 18 months in federal prison and lost his pension. He served his time quietly, wrote letters to Marcus that Olivia never opened, and moved to another state after his release. The last she heard, he was working security at a shopping mall, still convinced that he'd been the victim of a conspiracy. And Olivia? She kept feeding her son in the park, under the maple trees, watching him grow braver every day. Because that's what mothers do. They show their children how to stand up when the world tries to knock you down. They demonstrate that truth, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's dangerous, is still worth telling. They teach by example that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision that something else matters more than being afraid. Marcus learned to walk in that same park, taking his first wobbling steps across the grass, while Olivia cheered from the bench where she'd once been accused of dealing drugs. When he fell, she helped him up. When he succeeded, she celebrated. When other children stared or parents whispered, she smiled and kept playing, showing him that other people's opinions couldn't define his worth or limit his potential. On his second birthday, they had a party in the park. Friends from the hospital, colleagues from her FBI days, neighbors from their apartment building, and strangers who'd become friends through the shared experience of witnessing injustice and demanding better. Jeremy came with his camera, not to document drama this time, but to capture joy. Marcus blowing out candles, opening presents, laughing with the pure delight that only children can achieve. Sometimes, she told him, as he explored the playground with toddler determination, his legs sturdy now, his confidence growing with every step, the most radical thing you can do is simply refuse to disappear. He looked up at her with those same wide brown eyes that had watched her face down corrupt cops and planted evidence, smiled with the kind of trust that only children can give, and took another step forward, toward the swings, toward the future, toward a world that would judge him by his actions rather than his assumptions. The park was full of children that afternoon, their laughter mixing with the sound of traffic and birds, and all the ordinary miracles that make up a life. Olivia watched Marcus play, mentally cataloging the moment, his chubby hands gripping the swing chains, his delighted squeals as she pushed him higher, the way the late afternoon light caught in his curls and made everything look touched by gold. This was what they'd tried to take from her, not just her freedom or her reputation, but her right to exist peacefully in public spaces, to raise her child without fear, to trust that justice would prevail when lies were exposed. They'd failed. Marcus was thriving, she was stronger, and the world was just a little bit better for their refusal to be broken. In her pocket, her phone buzzed with notifications, interview requests, speaking invitations, messages from other mothers who'd seen the video and wanted to share their own stories. She'd answer them later. Right now, there was only this: sunshine and laughter and the sound of her son's voice calling, "Higher, Mama, higher," as if the sky was just the beginning of what he could reach.